Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. Tonight you go to bed feeling fine. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. You fall asleep the way you always do, and you never wake up. No goodbye, no second chance, just the last breath you never knew was your last. This happens to hundreds of thousands of adults over 60 every single year in this country alone. And the fact that keeps me awake as a physician, the fact I want every one of my patients to understand, is that most of those deaths were not written in stone. They were not sealed by genetics or age or fate. They were triggered by something those people did the night before. Something harmless looking, something they had done for years. Over the next several minutes, I'm going to show you the specific nighttime habits that dramatically increase your risk of heart attack and stroke during sleep. And more importantly, I'm going to give you a practical routine you can begin tonight to protect yourself. Everything I am about to share is grounded in published medical research, explained clearly, without jargon, in a way you can actually use. My name is Dr. Pablo. I am a board-certified geriatrician with 18 years of clinical experience focused on cardiovascular health in adults over 60. And I need you to understand something that most doctors never take the time to explain. Your heart is most vulnerable not when you are running, not when you are stressed, not when you are exerting yourself, but when you are lying still in the dark. The American Heart Association has documented that nearly half of all fatal cardiovascular events in older adults occur between midnight and 6 in the morning. Not because the heart suddenly weakens at night, but because of what happens to blood pressure, circulation, oxygen levels, and arterial stability during sleep, and how profoundly certain habits can disrupt every single one of those processes at once. During healthy sleep, your body is supposed to enter a precisely coordinated recovery state. Your blood pressure drops between 10 and 20%. Cardiologists call this the nocturnal dip, and it is one of the most important protective mechanisms your cardiovascular system has. Your heart rate slows and stabilizes. Your autonomic nervous system shifts away from sympathetic drive, the fight or flight state, and into parasympathetic dominance, which is the repair and restoration mode your organs depend on. Your brain activates its glymphatic system, a biological cleaning process that flushes toxic waste proteins from neural tissue. Waste that, if it accumulates, has been directly linked to stroke, cognitive decline, and dementia. This is what sleep is designed to do. This is what your body expects every single night. But when certain habits interfere with these processes, habits that look completely ordinary from the outside, sleep stops being a healing state and becomes a physiological crisis playing out in slow motion while you lie unconscious and unaware. I have been a geriatrician for nearly 2 decades. I have sat in hospital corridors with families who could not understand how someone they loved went to bed perfectly fine and was gone by morning. And in almost every one of those conversations, when I asked about the evening before, the same patterns emerged, the same habits, the same innocent-looking routines that had been loading the risk higher and higher, night after night, until one night the body could no longer compensate. That is what this video is about. Not fear, not alarm for the sake of alarm. Evidence, clinical reality, and the specific changes that can protect you starting tonight. Before I walk you through each habit, I want to flag the one that surprises people the most, the one that most adults over 60 are doing deliberately, believing it is actually good for them. It is habit number 4, and when I tell you what it is, I think it will genuinely shock you. Keep watching, because that one may be the most important thing you hear today. Let us begin. The first deadly nighttime habit is eating late and eating heavy. I want you to think about what time you had dinner last night and what was on your plate. Because after the age of 60, these 2 details, the timing and the content of your evening meal, can determine whether your heart spends the night resting or struggling under sustained physiological stress. When you consume a large meal late in the evening, particularly after 8 o'clock, your digestive system immediately begins demanding an enormous increase in blood flow. Your stomach, your intestines, your liver, all of them require significantly more circulation to process what you have eaten. That demand falls entirely on your heart. Your heart must pump harder and faster to redirect blood toward your digestive organs at the precise moment it is supposed to be slowing down and entering its own recovery cycle. Blood pressure rises instead of falling. Triglyceride levels spike in the bloodstream. Inflammatory markers in your arteries increase. The nocturnal dip, that critical 10 to 20% drop in blood pressure that protects your heart and brain overnight, either flattens entirely or reverses. A landmark study published in the European Heart Journal tracked over 110,000 adults across multiple countries for an average of 7 years. The findings were unambiguous. Adults who regularly consumed their largest meal after 8 in the evening had a measurably and significantly higher incidence of nighttime myocardial infarction and ischemic stroke compared to those who finished eating before 7. The mechanism was not mysterious. Late digestion keeps the cardiovascular system in an activated, high-demand state during the hours when it most needs relief. And there is a second layer to this danger that most people never connect to their heart. Going to bed with a full stomach dramatically increases gastroesophageal reflux, acid moving from the stomach back up into the esophagus. In older adults, this reflux directly stimulates the vagus nerve, which runs alongside the esophagus and has profound influence over heart rhythm. Vagal stimulation from acid reflux can trigger arrhythmias, irregular heart rhythms, including atrial fibrillation, which itself is a leading cause of stroke. This is not a remote possibility. It is a documented physiological sequence that I have seen play out in my own patients. Margaret was 67 years old, a retired high school librarian, grandmother of 3, and one of the most conscientious patients I have ever had. She monitored her blood pressure religiously, took her medications without fail, and walked 30 minutes every morning. What she did not think twice about was her dinner routine. She ate late, usually around 9 in the evening, because that was when her family gathered. Large meals, rich food, wine, then bed within the hour. She came into my office one morning after waking at 3 a.m. with what she described as a strange fluttering sensation in her chest and a heaviness in her left arm that had lasted several minutes before fading. Her ECG showed evidence of a brief ischemic event, a warning stroke. Her Holter monitor revealed episodes of atrial fibrillation occurring exclusively between 11 at night and 4 in the morning. Every single episode correlated with her late dinner window. We changed her eating schedule. We moved her main meal to 6:30. Within 8 weeks, the nocturnal arrhythmias had stopped entirely. Margaret still eats with her family. She just eats lighter, and she eats earlier. That change may have saved her life. The fix here is not complicated, but it requires commitment. Finish your largest meal before 7 in the evening whenever possible. If you eat later, keep portions small and avoid heavy fats, large amounts of salt, and refined carbohydrates. Give your body at least 2 to 3 hours between your last meal and the time you lie down. Your heart will spend the night recovering instead of working. The second deadly nighttime habit is one that affects tens of millions of older adults and is almost never discussed in the context of sleep safety. It is taking your blood pressure medication at the wrong time, or skipping it altogether. Blood pressure in the human body follows a predictable 24-hour rhythm called a circadian pattern. In healthy individuals, pressure rises in the morning, peaks in the early afternoon, and then falls during sleep. That is, the nocturnal dip I described earlier. But research has consistently shown that a significant percentage of adults over 60 experience what is called nocturnal hypertension, blood pressure that does not fall during sleep or actually rises. Some studies suggest this affects as many as 1 in 3 older adults with hypertension, and most of them have no idea it is happening because you cannot feel your blood pressure rising while you are unconscious. A series of landmark trials published in The Lancet, including the Hygia chronotherapy trial, which followed nearly 20,000 patients over 6 years, demonstrated something that fundamentally changed how many cardiologists think about medication timing. Patients who took at least one of their antihypertensive medications at bedtime, rather than in the morning, had a 45% lower risk of cardiovascular events, including heart attack, stroke, and cardiovascular death, compared to patients who took all their medications in the morning. 45%. That is not a marginal difference. That is a transformation in risk profile from a simple timing adjustment. When blood pressure medication is skipped entirely, or taken inconsistently, blood pressure during sleep can surge to dangerous levels without triggering any symptom that would wake you. These silent nighttime spikes place enormous mechanical stress on arterial walls. In arteries that already carry atherosclerotic plaque, the fatty deposits that build up over decades, that pressure can cause a rupture. The plaque tears. A clot forms instantly at the site of the tear. That clot can travel to the coronary arteries and cause a heart attack. It can travel to the cerebral arteries and cause a stroke. And it does this while you sleep, while your eyes are closed, while the people who love you have no idea anything is wrong. Frank was 72 years old. a former building contractor from Ohio, a man who had spent his entire adult life doing physical work and who had never once thought of himself as fragile. He had been on blood pressure medication for 11 years, but Frank had a habit of skipping doses when he felt fine, which was most of the time, because he reasoned that if he felt well, his pressure was probably under control. He skipped his medication 4 nights out of 7 on average. His wife called my office on a Wednesday morning. Frank had suffered a hemorrhagic stroke at approximately 2 in the morning. He survived, but he spent 4 months in rehabilitation and never fully recovered the use of his right hand. At his follow-up appointment, his ambulatory blood pressure monitor data showed nighttime readings that had been reaching 170 over 100 on the nights he skipped his medication. He had felt nothing. He had slept right through it. Please, if you are on blood pressure, cholesterol, or anticoagulation medication, talk to your doctor specifically about nighttime dosing. Do not skip doses because you feel fine. The whole point of these medications is to manage a process you cannot feel until it is too late. The third deadly nighttime habit is one that an estimated 30 million Americans are living with right now, most of them completely undiagnosed. It is untreated obstructive sleep apnea, and in adults over 60, it is one of the most efficient killers I know of. Sleep apnea is not simply snoring. I want to be very clear about that distinction because the two are commonly confused, and that confusion costs lives. Snoring is a sound. Sleep apnea is a physiological emergency that repeats itself dozens, sometimes hundreds, of times every single night. Here is what actually happens during an apnea episode. The muscles in your throat relax during sleep, and for people with this condition, they relax enough to partially or completely collapse the airway. Breathing stops. Oxygen levels in your blood begin to fall. Your brain detects the drop and triggers an emergency response, flooding your system with adrenaline and cortisol, spiking your heart rate, and jolting your blood pressure upward, sometimes by 30 to 40 millimeters of mercury in a matter of seconds. Your airway reopens, you take a breath, and then the entire sequence begins again. This can happen 5 times per hour in mild cases. In severe cases, it happens more than 30 times per hour. That is your cardiovascular system being put through a crisis response more than 30 times every single hour of sleep, and you remember almost none of it in the morning. The cumulative cardiovascular damage from years of untreated sleep apnea is catastrophic. Research published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology has shown that untreated severe sleep apnea increases the risk of fatal cardiac arrhythmia during sleep by 300%. A comprehensive meta-analysis drawing from studies across Johns Hopkins, the University of Wisconsin, and several European research centers confirmed that untreated sleep apnea more than triples the risk of nighttime stroke and nearly quadruples the risk of sudden cardiac death during sleep hours specifically. Not during exercise, not during stress, during sleep, the hours when you believe you are safest. The warning signs are ones that are easy to dismiss or rationalize. Loud, chronic snoring that your partner complains about, waking up gasping or choking without understanding why, morning headaches that fade within an hour of getting up, extreme daytime fatigue that does not improve no matter how many hours you spend in bed, blood pressure that remains stubbornly difficult to control despite medication. If any of these describe you or someone you live with, this is not something to monitor and see. This is something to bring to your physician immediately and request a sleep study. Carol was 64 years old, a recently retired nurse, someone who understood medicine, who had spent 40 years caring for other people's health, and who had somehow never applied that same scrutiny to her own. Her husband had been complaining about her snoring for years. She chalked it up to allergies and weight. One night her husband woke up and noticed she had stopped breathing entirely for what he estimated was nearly 40 seconds. He shook her awake. She gasped, confused, with no memory of the episode. A sleep study confirmed severe obstructive sleep apnea. Her oxygen was dropping below 80% multiple times per hour. Her cardiologist told her that her left ventricle was already showing signs of stress, consistent with years of nocturnal oxygen deprivation. She began CPAP therapy. Within 3 months, her blood pressure had dropped 12 points without any change in medication. Within 6 months, her cardiologist described her cardiac function as dramatically improved. Carol told me she wished she had dealt with it a decade earlier. She is right. She is lucky she had the chance. If you suspect sleep apnea, Sleeping on your side rather than your back can reduce the frequency of episodes, but it is not a treatment. It is a temporary measure while you pursue proper diagnosis. A sleep study is the only way to know what is actually happening to your body during those hours you spend unconscious. The fourth deadly nighttime habit is the one I flagged at the beginning of this video, the one that will surprise you the most, because most of the adults I see in my clinic who do this are doing it on purpose. They are doing it because they think it is the responsible choice. They are going to bed dehydrated. Here is the logic I hear constantly from patients over 60. They tell me they stop drinking water after 6 or 7 in the evening because they do not want to wake up at 2 in the morning to use the bathroom. They have read about the importance of uninterrupted sleep. They are trying to protect their rest. And I understand that reasoning completely. The problem is that this well-intentioned habit is placing their cardiovascular system under serious and measurable risk every single night. After the age of 60, the physiological mechanisms that regulate fluid balance change significantly. Your kidneys become less efficient at concentrating urine, meaning your body loses more water overnight than it did when you were younger. Your thirst sensation, controlled largely by hypothalamic osmoreceptors, becomes markedly less sensitive, so you often do not feel thirsty even when your body is already in a state of mild dehydration. And your total body water percentage decreases with age, meaning your circulatory system has less fluid reserve to draw from in the first place. When you deliberately restrict fluid intake in the evening, and then spend 7 or 8 hours losing water through respiration and perspiration, you can arrive at 3 or 4 in the morning in a state of significant hemoconcentration, meaning your blood has become thicker and more viscous than it should be. The cardiovascular consequences of this are direct and serious. Thicker blood flows more slowly through your vessels. Slower moving blood is dramatically more prone to clot formation, particularly in the smaller arteries supplying the brain and heart. At the same time, your heart rate has slowed and your blood pressure has dropped as part of normal sleep physiology, which means circulation to critical organs is already reduced compared to daytime. Add hemoconcentration to that reduced flow, and the risk of an ischemic event, a clot blocking a coronary or cerebral artery, rises sharply. A study published in the Journal of the American Heart Association found that even mild to moderate dehydration at bedtime increased the measurable risk of nocturnal ischemic stroke by more than 55% in adults over 65. That is not a trivial number. That is more than half again the baseline risk, from something as simple as not drinking enough water before bed. Thomas was 70 years old, a retired high school football coach from Tennessee, a man who had spent his entire career teaching young men about discipline and preparation. He was meticulous about his health in almost every way. He exercised, he watched his diet, he took his medications. But Thomas had stopped drinking anything after 6 in the evening years ago, after a bout of nocturia had disrupted his sleep. He was proud of it. He told me it had fixed his sleep problem entirely. What he did not know was what was happening inside his arteries at 4 in the morning. He called my office from the emergency room on a Friday. He had woken at 4:15 with slurred speech and confusion that had lasted approximately 8 minutes before clearing. A transient ischemic attack, a warning stroke. Imaging showed a small area of restricted diffusion in his left cerebral hemisphere. His blood work that morning showed significantly elevated hematocrit, a direct marker of dehydration-related blood thickening. We reviewed his evening habits together in the hospital room. The connection was not subtle. The solution does not require you to sacrifice your sleep. Drink 1 full glass of water, 8 to 10 ounces, approximately 90 minutes before you intend to go to bed. Use the bathroom immediately before lying down. Keep a small glass of water on your nightstand and take 2 or 3 sips if you wake during the night. This approach maintains adequate hydration throughout the night without forcing you up repeatedly. Your blood stays fluid, your circulation stays smooth, and your heart and brain receive the flow they need during the most vulnerable hours of the day. The fifth deadly nighttime habit is one that almost no one connects to cardiovascular risk, and yet the research on it is remarkably consistent. It is sleeping in a room that is either too warm or too cold. Your body temperature and your cardiovascular system are far more tightly linked than most people realize. During healthy sleep, your core body temperature naturally declines by 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit as part of the same circadian process that lowers blood pressure and slows heart rate. This temperature drop is not incidental. It is an active signal to your cardiovascular system that it is time to reduce its workload. When the environment interferes with that process, the consequences reach directly into your heart. When your bedroom is too warm, above approximately 75 degrees Fahrenheit, your body struggles to offload heat efficiently. Blood vessels in your skin dilate in an attempt to radiate warmth outward. Your heart rate increases to support that increased peripheral circulation. You lose fluid through perspiration, compounding any existing dehydration. And critically, your blood pressure fails to drop the way it should. The nocturnal dip is blunted or eliminated entirely. Research from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health has shown that sleeping in rooms above 74 degrees Fahrenheit is associated with significantly elevated nighttime heart rate and impaired blood pressure regulation, both of which are independent risk factors for nocturnal cardiovascular events. But cold is equally dangerous and in some ways more immediately threatening. When bedroom temperature drops below 65 degrees Fahrenheit, your body responds by constricting peripheral blood vessels to conserve core heat. This vasoconstriction increases what cardiologists call systemic vascular resistance, the pressure your heart must pump against with every beat. In an older adult with arterial stiffness, which is nearly universal after the age of 60, this added resistance can be enough to trigger a hypertensive crisis during sleep. European cardiovascular surveillance data has shown measurable spikes in nighttime heart attack and stroke incidents on cold nights, with older adults bearing a disproportionate share of those events. The arteries most vulnerable are the coronary arteries and the cerebral arteries, precisely the ones where a blockage is fatal or permanently disabling. The optimal sleeping temperature for cardiovascular protection in adults over 60 is between 65 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit. At this range, your body can complete its natural temperature decline without triggering either heat-related cardiovascular stress or cold-induced vasoconstriction. This is not about comfort. This is about giving your heart and your arteries the environmental conditions they need to complete their nightly repair cycle without interruption. Now I want to pause here and ask you something. If you are watching this right now and you recognize yourself in any of these habits, the late dinners, the missed medications, the untreated snoring, the restricted fluids, the bedroom that runs too warm or too cold, I want you to do something for me. Write your age and where in the world you are watching from in the comments below. Not because I am curious about the geography, but because every time someone reads a comment from a 71-year-old in Arizona or a 68-year-old in Scotland who changed a habit after watching this video, it reminds the next person watching that this information is real, that it applies to real people, and that it is not too late to act. Write it right now before you forget. The sixth deadly nighttime habit is one that has emerged from research conducted over the last 15 years, and it is the one that I believe deserves far more public attention than it currently receives. It is the habit of going to bed with unresolved emotional stress, what researchers now call pre-sleep cognitive arousal, and it is directly and measurably linked to nocturnal cardiovascular events in older adults. I want to be precise about what I mean here because this is not about having a bad day or feeling worried about something. This is about a specific physiological state that occurs when the mind remains in active problem-solving or threat response mode at the moment sleep begins. When you lie down with unresolved anxiety, replaying a difficult conversation, running financial calculations, processing anger or grief, your sympathetic nervous system remains activated, cortisol levels stay elevated, adrenaline continues circulating, and your cardiovascular system, which should be transitioning into its protected low-demand nighttime state, instead remains primed for action. The consequences of this are not abstract. Research published in JAMA Internal Medicine, tracking over 80,000 adults over a period of 9 years, found that individuals who reported high levels of pre-sleep psychological stress had a 67% higher incidence of fatal nocturnal cardiovascular events compared to those who reported low pre-sleep stress. A separate study from the European Heart Journal specifically examined adults over 60 and found that chronic pre-sleep rumination, the technical term for repetitive anxious thinking at bedtime, was associated with sustained nighttime blood pressure elevation, suppression of the nocturnal dip, and increased inflammatory markers in arterial tissue. In plain terms, going to bed angry, anxious, or mentally activated keeps your blood pressure high, keeps your arteries inflamed, and keeps your heart working at a level it should not be working at during sleep. There is a biological reason this disproportionately affects older adults. After 60, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the system that regulates your cortisol and stress hormone response, becomes less efficient at shutting itself down. In younger people, cortisol drops relatively quickly once a stressor passes. In older adults, elevated cortisol can persist for hours after the triggering event. This means that an argument at 9 in the evening, a distressing phone call, an hour of watching emotionally activating news, any of these can keep your cardiovascular system in a heightened state well past midnight, even if you fall asleep relatively quickly. You are asleep, but your heart does not know it is supposed to be resting. Dorothy was 69 years old, a retired social worker from Georgia, who had spent her entire career managing other people's crises and who had never quite learned to set her own worries down at the end of the day. She came to me after her second episode of nocturnal chest pain in 3 months, both times occurring between 2 and 3 in the morning, both times resolving on their own but leaving her shaken and exhausted. Her cardiac workup was significant but not dramatic. Mild coronary artery disease, well-managed hypertension, no prior events. What stood out in her history was her bedtime routine. She watched the evening news until 10:30. She then spent time on her phone reading about her grandchildren's lives on social media, which she described as mostly worrying about them. She went to bed thinking about everything she had read and seen. Her ambulatory blood pressure monitor showed that her nighttime readings were consistently 12 to 15 points higher than her daytime readings, the exact opposite of the protective nocturnal dip. We built her a structured wind-down protocol. No news or emotionally activating content after 8:30. 15 minutes of written reflection, putting her worries on paper rather than carrying them into sleep. Gentle breathing exercises in the final 10 minutes before lying down. Within 6 weeks, her nocturnal blood pressure had normalized. Her chest pain episodes stopped entirely. Dorothy told me at her next appointment that she had not realized how much her mind had been keeping her heart awake. That is exactly the right way to describe it. The research supports a structured wind-down period of at least 45 minutes to 1 hour before sleep, during which you deliberately disengage from emotionally activating content and allow your nervous system to complete its transition from sympathetic to parasympathetic dominance. This is not a luxury. For adults over 60 with any degree of cardiovascular risk, it is a clinical necessity. Now let me give you what I promised at the beginning of this video. A complete protective nighttime routine, specific, practical, and grounded in everything the research tells us about cardiovascular safety during sleep. Begin at 6:30 in the evening with your main meal of the day. Keep it moderate in portion, lean in protein, and rich in vegetables. Avoid large amounts of saturated fat, heavy salt, and refined sugar. Finish eating by 7 o'clock whenever possible, and do not lie down for at least 2.5 hours after your last bite. At 7 o'clock, take any medications your physician has prescribed for evening or bedtime administration. If you are unsure whether your blood pressure medication should be taken at night, make that call to your doctor this week. Not eventually, this week. The Hygieia trial data alone makes this conversation worth having. Between 7 and 8:30, engage in genuinely calming activity. A gentle walk of 15 to 20 minutes after dinner is ideal. It assists digestion, stabilizes post-meal blood sugar, and begins the gradual wind-down of cardiovascular activity. After your walk, reading, quiet music, or calm conversation are all appropriate. This is the window where you begin deliberately lowering the arousal level of your nervous system. At 8:30, turn off the news. Close the social media applications. Put down anything that is likely to generate worry, anger, or emotional activation. Your nervous system needs the next 90 minutes to complete its transition. This is not optional if you have cardiovascular risk factors. At 9 o'clock, drink 8 to 10 ounces of water. This is your hydration buffer for the night, enough to maintain adequate blood viscosity through the early morning hours without forcing multiple bathroom visits. Adjust your bedroom thermostat to between 65 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Place a small glass of water on your nightstand. Between 9 and 9:30, if pre-sleep rumination is something you recognize in yourself, if your mind tends to race when your head hits the pillow, spend 10 to 15 minutes writing. Not journaling in a general sense. Specifically, write down the things that are worrying you, and next to each one, write one concrete action you intend to take. This technique, studied at Baylor University and published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology, has been shown to reduce pre-sleep cognitive arousal and accelerate sleep onset by an average of 9 minutes, which sounds modest until you understand that the first 30 minutes of sleep involve some of the most important cardiovascular regulation of the entire night. At 9:30, complete your bathroom routine. Empty your bladder fully before lying down. Take any remaining prescribed medications. If you use a CPAP machine for sleep apnea, ensure it is set up and ready before you get into bed, not after, when you may be too tired to set it up correctly. By 10 o'clock, your room should be dark, cool, and quiet. If you sleep on your back and you snore or suspect apnea, make a deliberate effort to position yourself on your side with a pillow supporting your neck in neutral alignment. If you wake during the night, move slowly. Sit at the edge of the bed for 30 seconds before standing, because blood pressure shifts rapidly with positional change in older adults and orthostatic hypotension. A sudden drop in pressure upon standing is itself a documented cause of falls and cardiac stress in the early morning hours. Take 2 or 3 small sips of water if you wake, and then return to sleep. This routine, followed consistently, addresses every single one of the 6 habits I have described today. It is not complicated. It does not require medication changes or expensive equipment. It requires decision and consistency. I want to close with something I say to every patient I see who has survived a nighttime cardiac event and is sitting across from me in the recovery phase trying to understand what happened. I tell them this: your heart has been working for you without pause, without rest, without a single day off, since before you were born. It has never asked you for anything. What I am asking you to do tonight is simply give it the conditions it needs to do its job while you sleep. That is all. Turn down the temperature, drink the water, take the medication, eat earlier, address the snoring, quiet the mind. These are not burdens. They are the minimum your heart deserves after everything it has done for you. If this video gave you something useful, a habit you are going to change, a conversation you are going to have with your doctor, a family member you are going to call, please share it. Not for the channel, for them. Because the person you are thinking of right now as you watch this, the spouse, the parent, the friend, may be making one of these mistakes tonight without knowing it. And you now have information that could change that. If you are not yet subscribed to this channel, I ask you to do that now. Every week I bring you clinical information on cardiovascular and geriatric health that is grounded in real research and designed for adults over 60 who deserve honest, evidence-based answers, not fear, not vague advice, not oversimplified reassurances. Real information, because you are capable of handling it and making good decisions with it. Sleep should be the safest part of your day. Make it that way, starting tonight. X.